So first of all, I wanted to say thank you to everyone for being here. So I am getting full on imposter syndrome now. Talking to all of the experience that's in the room here. It's really interesting to hear the number of different areas that people are working in. Hopefully, there's something in my talk that's useful to you. And I'm really happy to follow up. So if anyone afterwards has questions specific to your area of work that you want to know more about, then please do come back to me via Sarah. That's fine. So my name's Hannah. I am a humanist celebrant. So I've been a celebrant for nearly 12 years now. And I actually also work for Humanist UK for the last 2 years, providing volunteer support. Um, in terms of involvement with the pastoral care side of things, I volunteered for a time at Kirkwood Hospice within their spiritual care team. So I have some experience, but more experience in the sort of funeral side of things. Um, those of you who are celebrants, you'll know that often comes in anyway if you are visiting someone before before they've died because they want to discuss their funeral, or the sort of pastoral side of what we do with families, when you're sitting with someone in their grief and trying to work out what it is that they want or need from the funeral process. Um, but I am not a sort of fully trained up and accredited non-religious pastoral practitioner. So we do have a network that Humanist UK support. We have a network of practitioners, and some very rigorous training. And I'm not pretending that I've done all of that training. So I'm really just here today to share a bit of a perspective on humanism itself. I don't know if I can just get a quick show of hands sort of in the room, as to who is clear what humanism means, or if I just very briefly would be worth me going over that. Um, Not a lot of hands up, so that's fine. I will include a little bit about that then. Um, and then how that might feed into considerations around end of life care and funeral sort of planning. So I am, sorry, a bit useless on Zoom, but I'm just going to hopefully share my presentation. Um, so really basic premise for humanists. So the sort of uh, when I go into schools to talk about humanism, and usually I start with the students with the basic premise of humanists believe that we only have one life. So this life that we are living now um, is the one we get. So we don't have a belief in an afterlife or reincarnation or sort of some other place that we will move on to after we die. Um, and that's kind of fundamental, I think, to how anyone would approach end of life care or funeral planning for someone with humanist beliefs. Um, because sometimes some of the kind of default settings for people, or the phrases that people reach for that are intended to be comforting, don't apply if you believe that this is our one life. There are plenty of things that can be comforting, but I've worked with families who have had comments from other people about where their loved one has gone on to, and things that they found quite hurtful because that's not what they believe, and that's not what they're sort of looking for in terms of comfort and support. So I think that's sort of that basic idea is worth just keeping in the back of your mind if you're with someone who's expressed humanist beliefs. It's worth me saying that we know that sort of slightly over half the population of the UK consider themselves to be non-religious. That doesn't in any way mean that all those people have a humanist viewpoint. So non-religious covers a whole range of what people consider their beliefs to be. That can involve various interpretations of things that probably wouldn't sit within a humanist viewpoint. So, but if somebody has explicitly said I'm a humanist, then you can be confident of kind of this basic premise. Um, but humanism is not, people will often say to me, oh, humanists don't believe in God or a God. Um, and that technically is true, but it's not the basis of my belief. It's not that important to me. What is important to me is what I do believe in. So that is the importance of trying to make the most of this one life. I believe in the capacity of people to treat each other well. I appreciate we don't always manage it, but that the capacity is there, and that's important to try. Um, And usually, that for most humanists, there's an element of the importance of life overall. So it's not just about humans, it's about, most humanists agree that sort of looking after the planet, looking after other living things is also important. um, but it does mean that where we look for inspiration or a sense of wonder in the world might be different to someone who has another belief. Things like human endeavor and achievement, or the natural world and the amazing things in it, those, or sort of that human connection, those are often the places where humanists will find um, their joy or inspiration. um, and I suppose sort of what I tried to do for today was think about, in terms of end of life care, what that might mean for all of you who are working in the field, um, and then how it would apply to humanists. So pastoral care in itself, or sort of what often gets called chaplaincy, certainly in a healthcare setting, usually involves sort of three main elements. So the sort of idea of spiritual care, um, pastoral care, so that sort of emotional support, and also for some people religious care, so that sort of opportunity to actually support somebody in practicing their belief, be that through sort of rituals or rites and things like that. And I sort of think spiritual care is a really important part of that offering for humanists as well as for those with religious beliefs. I think the term spiritual can mean very different things to different people, and potentially part of your conversation with someone who's expressed a humanist belief might be whether spiritual is a term that they would want to use, um, because some humanists will be quite strong in their sort of sense of, I don't believe in the spirit as a concept, but other people will talk about spiritual care being relevant to them. So, I mean, this was a definition that I put up here from, which is from NHS education. As spiritual care is a care which recognises and responds to the needs of the human spirit. And as I say, if your definition of human spirit, humanists might choose to put a different word in at that point. Um, but including the need for meaning, self-worth, expressing oneself, or simply a listening ear, all of those things are relevant to humanists. Um, and and I think um, for some humanists, it is about expanding your thoughts beyond what is in sort of immediately around you. So the idea of spirituality, um, for Richard Norman, who's a humanist philosopher, he was talking about sort of lifting the spirits, the idea of inspiration, that sense of awe and wonder, which humanists at the end of life might be wanting to reflect on. They might be wanting to look back at the things um, that were most important to them in their life, the things that they still now, when they think about, raise a smile. Um, for some people, it is about a sense of connection, but connection with an idea bigger than ourselves, rather than necessarily a kind of, obviously we don't believe in supernatural beings, so it's not a connection with a god, it's not a connection with sort of souls as a sort of separate entity from the body, but a feeling of connection with the wider world or with the human community. Those kind of things might be described as spirituality by a humanist, and certainly might well form part of a conversation when you're sitting with somebody sort of at the end of their life. Um, and I think what we're finding in terms of work within pastoral care settings is that there's a move away from the idea of spiritual care as firstly being just about religion. So this broader concept of spiritual care, um, obviously providing spiritual care, and I feel like this probably doesn't need saying to the people in this room, but it's not never about imposing your beliefs or values on others or trying to sort of convert someone to your way of thinking. But I think most practitioners in the end of life sort of area of work, that's what they're bringing. They're not bringing a sort of aim to convert. They're bringing an aim to be alongside people. Um, but also that it's not specialist. It's not just down to the person whose name says spiritual care on their badge. Everyone who is supporting someone at the end of life is probably providing some element of spiritual care. Um, and certainly it's not only down to the chaplain. And spiritual care may well involve conversations around ideas around meaning, ideas around connection, um, potentially reflections on how someone has lived. And certainly for a humanist, they might well be looking back and thinking about their life and um, potentially acknowledging regrets, as well as sort of thinking about the positives or the things that they are proud of or really glad of. Um, and being able to just have sort of an honest conversation around those. Um, that I put this in because it was a slide that the head of pastoral care from Humanist UK suggested. And I think her intention was to share ways in which that spiritual care might be provided. So it might be about that you are supporting somebody in completing a ritual that is important to them. Now, for humanists, there are no specific rituals that we need. There's nothing that has to be done at the end of life. There's not a sort of book of words, phrases, actions, anything like that. But sometimes some people will want a ritual. The sort of need for humans to find a way of expressing things through ritual. You only have to look back through history to see how important that is to some people, because communities all over the world have developed rituals to express particular um, sort of settings or actions. And it might be that you are sitting with a humanist developing some kind of ritual that they want, and it might be something that they want to complete while they're alive, or it might be that you're helping them to plan something for the people who will be left behind after they've died. Um, as with humanist ceremonies, and again for the independent celebrants, you'll know this every ceremony is different anyway. So I wouldn't dream to say what that ritual might entail, but just being open to what somebody is asking for and saying that they need, then I think you would just help them to work that out. It might be about helping with community. It might be about bringing a sense of belonging, reminding somebody where they um, you know where they find that sense of belonging, and potentially sitting with someone at the end of life who is um, encountering sort of difficult emotions, maybe not feeling connected, maybe feeling regretful about connections that have been lost, um, sort of trying to bring, offering them some ideas around where they find that sense of belonging, um, and having conversations with them about their life and whether so some of those conversations might be around a feeling of purpose, or potentially again regret about not having been able to fulfill what they had seen as the purpose in their life. um, and it's not about answering those questions. It is simply about giving a space for somebody to express that. And sometimes, in my experience, which is limited, I admit, but sometimes people work through and they do find a sense of um, sort of release or calm, or but sometimes they don't. So they just express that they are sad or angry or regretful about something, and you can simply acknowledge that. Often humanists are not expecting an answer, because that's not sort of how we um, have lived our lives anyway, sort of feeling as though there is some great answer to everything. But having that sort of human acknowledgement is sufficient. Um, so for humanist pastoral support, it's a conversation. It is about being alongside, and simply acknowledging um, what somebody is going through and what they are telling you, and in a safe space. It's offering empathy. So it is trying to understand. You obviously can't know what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes, but you can try and understand it, and really listen to what somebody's describing to you. It's leaving a sense of autonomy with the person who is at the end of their lives. So it's not about, like I say, giving instruction. It's not about answering their problems, and it's not about steering them in a particular path. It's simply letting them decide what they need that conversation to be. Um, Sometimes it might be about finding meaning and purpose, but again, I don't think that's something that when I've given pastoral support, I don't feel like I have provided meaning and purpose. Sometimes I've provided the space in which somebody found their own. They worked their own way there. And obviously, hopefully, the outcome is potentially a sense of hope. Like I say, not always. Um, I would hope it would be some improvement in well-being for that person, even if it is just in knowing that they have been heard, that their situation has not fundamentally changed, but they have been heard and listened to, and that they have been valued, that as an individual. Um, so as I say, the conversation will be whatever that person needs it to be. But certainly, that idea of personal meaning and relationships for humanists is important because we know each life is different, and what matters to people is different. And when you sit and listen to families planning a funeral as well, it's very apparent just how individual those lives are, and potentially for some humanists, the exploring the natural world where possible can be a positive tool. Again, I would say not everyone, but a lot of humanists do draw great comfort from the natural world. And if you can bring some of that into that sort of end of life space, whether they are in a position themselves to spend some time outdoors, or whether it's more about the conversations that you have, or even potentially bringing in some element that sort of brings comfort. It might be you know natural items that you can bring in, or that they want to uh, use for a piece of art or a piece of expression. Then often sort of natural materials are comforting. Um, the basics of empathy and compassionate listening and focused listening. Um, and So for some people, the big existential questions come into it. And I've had conversations where people do want to talk about meaning and the sort of whys of what happens. But actually, quite often, the conversations I had in the hospice weren't about those big existential questions, and I don't think they need to be introduced. Again, it's about that sort of person-centered approach and following what each individual needs. Um, if somebody does raise big questions like that, again, they're probably not looking for an answer. They're probably just looking for a space to discuss them. And as I said, for some individuals, developing some kind of ritual can be useful. Um, Again, that's probably not something that I would proffer. But if somebody mentioned that they wanted to, they're finding it difficult to maybe express something, or they would quite like to mark um, sort of where they're at now or where they're going to be, then having a few ideas around, something that might also involve their family or friends, then that can feel like a very positive way of bringing people together at a time where often people are feeling very sort of alone. Um, so um, I think I just put on here some ideas again for what that might mean for people. So sometimes it is creating something. So I've had some families where um, the person who was at end of life did want to make something with um, their loved ones. Sometimes they just kind of described an idea, and then it was the families who, after they died, picked it up and said, "Okay, we want to do that for her." Or him. And it was something that in those situations happened to be incorporated into the funeral ceremony, but it wouldn't have to be. It might be a longer term project that somebody takes on, like the sort of quilt making or something like that. I have caught up with families 2 or 3 years down the line where somebody said, "Oh, um, even something like I finished, this was mum had started this project, so I took it on and I finished it, and that was my gift to her as a way of sort of remembering all the things that she created." Um, Sometimes bringing the that sense of ritual through from before someone's died into the funeral is quite a helpful pathway. Sort of some humanists have said they found that really that sort of bridging of the time from when before someone died to when the funeral is still a form of goodbye. Um, Although for humanists, because we obviously don't believe in an afterlife, we don't think that there is something of that person waiting for us elsewhere, that who we're going to meet again. Um, but there is obviously something of that person still with us. So humanist funerals themselves are all about just celebrating who that person was, and the memories that we choose to keep of them, um, in all their honesty. So very few people manage to only leave behind good memories. um, but the idea with the humanist funeral is a genuine acknowledgement of a real person. It's not sort of about necessarily storytelling, although I'm sure there will be some interpretation, and people are selective in terms of what they share with you as a celebrant. um, but I've had a lot of families who've said they want the, you call it warts and all, but they want to sort of feel like the person they've lost is the person I'm talking about. And so to only dwell on positives can feel slightly false. Um, but it can, the funerals themselves again can be completely individual, which is not exclusive to humanist funerals, obviously. And the sort of finding of what matters to one particular family or group of friends or whoever it is that's sort of marking the loss of someone is part of the sort of important work of the celebrant. And as I say, I acknowledge a lot of the celebrants here are not humanist celebrants, but we're sort of working along the same lines of sitting with a family and really trying to work out what it is that they want. Um, and as I say, sometimes, so for example, the decorating the coffin, so the picture on the left, um, that's something that some families have chosen to start with the person before they've died. So that they've had a chance to kind of put their mark on the coffin, and then after they've died, family and friends have sort of piled in and sort of chosen to decorate it. Um, and that's lovely, but I would say, of 1,200 funerals, that's happened twice. So it's not as though all humanists would choose to do that. But sometimes mentioning kind of things you could choose to do, I think opens up people's thoughts and ideas about how they might want to express things. And I'm not being paid to say this, but that's what Full Circle are so good at genuinely asking and saying, "Have you considered?" So that people don't sort of fall into the sort of the one way or the right way to do things. Um, and I think that overall in the whole sort of funeral industry now, there is gradually that shift to a more person-centered approach, which fits really nicely with the sort of pastoral side of things. Um, because part of what we're doing is offering pastoral care to the the people who are grieving. And I think being having a sort of genuine open and focused conversation and really listening provides them with a better experience, um, a more positive experience of the grieving process. I've had people say that to me. Um, so I'd forgotten I put that slide in actually, but yes, so choice is the important element, I think, because humanists we spend our lives having to make our own minds up about things. So we don't have a big book that tells us how we're supposed to live, or kind of what the rules are. Obviously, there are societal rules, laws, conventions, all those kind of things that we're working within. But humanism is very much about considering what we know of things and doing some thinking ourselves and making our choices about how we live. And so I think um, empowering people to do the same at the end of their lives is really important for humanists. Um, be that in that sort of end of life phase, or be it about the sort of funeral planning. Um, so for the funeral, it's anything from where you have it to what you arrive in, but always person centered. So always considering potentially any wishes left behind by the person who's died. Um, that in itself can sometimes be a tension. You'll all know the people who sort of say, "Oh, don't bother with anything for me. Stick me in a bin bag, and go to the pub, whatever." Um, Sometimes families get really stuck on, but they said this was what we should do, but it's not really what we want to do. We actually want a funeral. We want a chance to express that. And again, from a humanist perspective, it's quite easy to say, well, actually, as a humanist, with the best will in the world, I don't think they're in the room anymore. So actually, this funeral is for you. It's for the people who are left behind, um, and it needs to be what you need it to be. And that almost gives permission for people to say, okay, right, well, then we do want some kind of ceremony, or actually, we did want to get this particular kind of coffin, or what have you. So it's often a balance. It's not that those personal wishes overrule everything, but obviously, most families want to try and respect the wishes of the person who's died as much as possible. Um, some of that can come into those sort of pre-need visits. So going to sit with someone who sometimes already has a terminal diagnosis, but not always. Sometimes people just want to have a conversation about these things um, when they're otherwise well, and they're just kind of trying to get their thoughts in order. Um, and again, in those conversations, it's worth saying, if you're talking to a humanist, how much of this do you need to plan? You don't have to have everything, written out, decided. How much do you want to leave for your family or friends to choose for you or for themselves? And again, sort of just having that honest conversation, that when they potentially are going, it'll really help them if I decide everything, and maybe floating the idea that some of those choices might be really beneficial for the family or friends to make when the time comes. Uh, I'll put a brief plug in for the Humanist Funeral Tribute Archive. So anyone who has a humanist funeral has the option for the tribute, so the eulogy, to be uploaded onto the tribute archive. I only mention it because for some families who have chosen to take that up when I've done the ceremony, they've said how comforting they found it, that their loved one's record was that sort of there for posterity. The idea of the tribute archive came from looking back at the kind of social history records and how much is recorded of the sort of big lives, the lives that made the papers and those kind of things, when actually we all see the importance of everyone's individual life, a lot of which don't get recorded. So the idea of the archive was that all of these lives have value, and and so for some families, and often it's the ones where they are also engaged with genealogy and that idea of a recording of lives lived is important to them, but not always. Sometimes they've not expressed that at all, and then when I've mentioned it, they've said, oh, that would be so lovely to be able to do that for them. So again, it's just one of those where it's only ever an individual choice, an option, might suit some humanists but not all. um, I think I think that's enough of me waffling. Sorry, that felt very incoherent. But I did want to say thank you again that people have come today. I thank you to Sarah for inviting me to speak, um, and um, and also to say thank you for the fact that you're here today. Means that you are thinking about trying to be inclusive of all beliefs. And I have to say that it is not universally true, that we have humanists who experience pastoral care that is not inclusive. And that's part of the reason why we set up the non-religious pastoral support network, to try and make sure that, um, not only it's not that necessarily there needs to be a humanist pastoral carer in a setting, but it's as much as anything to, um, show the importance of considering that non-religious worldview, which some areas of chaplaincy previously I don't think did, and I think that some humanists therefore received a kind of substandard level of pastoral care, or just didn't receive it at all because they hadn't written a religion down when they came into the hospice, and so therefore nobody went to see them. And that's also not, obviously not an ideal outcome. So